Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider, presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Evan Grant and Joe Hoyt. Joe's here to talk about the Cowboys as we're taping this on Tuesday morning. This is cut day, and Joe has a few of those. We're going to also talk about Jerry's travails with Micah Parsons' agent, David Mulugheta, and the silly things he says about that. But first, we wanted to kind of get to some of these cuts and some of the concerns that Joe might have for the roster and how it sets up at some key positions. So Joe, who do we have so far as we're taping this now?
Yeah, it's 10 o'clock here on Tuesday. Deadline's 3 p.m. So still about 26, 25 moves left to go. So a lot of room here for moves. The one interesting one that's come down so far is the Cowboys are going to place Peyton Turner on injured reserve, and that's a free agent acquisition they had on the defensive line. This is a guy that he'll be designated to return. So this won't be a season-ending IR thing with him. But I do think that this bodes well for a guy like James Houston. We haven't gotten full clarity on what his future is, but James Houston, the guy was one of the last guys signed in training camp, was a tryout guy, came in and just consistently impressed, played really well in games. I asked Brian Schottenheimer, how are you going to, he wants to be comprehensive with his review of these guys, but how do you kind of balance recency bias with things they might have shown a month ago? And he said, hey, we're going to weight the padded work and specifically the joint practice with the Rams and the games very heavily. And if you look at that, James Houston might be the biggest beneficiary of that, had a nice sack in the preseason finale against Atlanta. So I think, we'll find out more about James Houston's future, but this might be a guy that earned his way onto the roster.
Let me ask you about him because he's had some sacks wherever he's played and wherever he's been. How come he hasn't stuck anywhere?
Yeah, good question. I was talking to him about this. He actually was the only guy cut from the 2022 Lions draft class when he was a 6th round pick out of Jackson State. He was Deion Sanders' first ever draft pick. But despite being cut, he came in and had 8 sacks in 7 games, tied the NFL record for most sacks to start a career in consecutive games. He had 5 consecutive games with sacks to start his career. He was only 1 sack away from Aiden Hutchinson that year, who was also in his draft class. So kind of give you a perspective of what he's done when he's been healthy on the field. He's dealt with some injuries, had a season-ending leg injury at one point. So this is a guy that, he just hasn't been able to stick, partly because of injuries, partly just because of situation stuff. But I think he might have forced his way onto the Cowboys roster, to be honest with you. And he said, hey, I'm just looking for a situation where I could thrive and a situation where I can stick, because I believe if I'm on the field on a consistent basis, I'm someone that can make plays. I want to average more than a sack per game. I think that'll be tough to do in a rotation with the Cowboys, but I think he might have earned his way onto it.
Okay. All right. Well, give us an idea here, a couple of the areas of concern here, Joe. I know that we feel like that Joe Milton played better in that last preseason game and cinched up his probably the number 2 quarterback spot for the Cowboys. That I guess in your previous mock cuts, you have said that the Cowboys will probably just go with those 2 and bring back Will Grier on the practice squad. Is that something you think is probably still going to happen?
Yeah, because I think that because Will Grier being a veteran, he's kind of outlasted the waiver period. That he's past his 4th year. This is a guy that can kind of have a wink-wink, nudge-nudge deal with, bring him back on the practice squad and, say, hey, you are our 3rd quarterback. And we can activate you for game days. We can have more time with you before we have to fully put you on the roster for the whole season. That seems to be kind of a logical thing there. I think the risk of potentially Will Grier leaving like he did a couple of years ago after they traded for Trey Lance is outweighed by the reward of having 2 roster spots with QBs right now, allowing them flexibility and freedom elsewhere across the roster. Like, I expect them to go heavy on defensive line, and I wouldn't be surprised if they went a little heavy at corner too, frankly. That's still a position. Trayvon Diggs is going to be activated. I mean, he was activated. He's going to be on the 53-man roster. That was one kind of question heading into this regular season. That means that they believe he's going to be ready to go by the end of week 3 at the absolute latest. He said he's going to try and push for week 1, but you still have that question mark of when exactly he'll be ready. So I wouldn't be surprised if they carry a little bit extra depth there. They already cut Troy Pride, who was a guy that was competing to be one of those outside corner depth pieces. They have Keemon Hall and Zion Childress kind of fighting their way for the slot. We'll see if both or one of those guys makes it and potentially could get some reps at the nickel corner spot. if Trayvon Diggs is not ready to go. Andrew Booth seems like a guy that's going to make this roster. So, those are that's one position that allows you a little bit more flexibility and freedom if you can keep 2 rather than 3 quarterbacks.
What's the story on Siobhan Ravel? I mean, what was he, the second round pick? I'm trying to remember, a third round pick.
Third round pick, yeah,
Third
out of
round
East
pick.
Carolina.
What's his story?
Yeah, it's one of those things. He tore his ACL in week 2 last year at East Carolina. Immensely talented guy. This is someone that they were talking about as a first round pick prior to the injury. He believes that he could have been the top corner selected in the NFL draft if not for the injury last year. Ball hawking corner, big and tall. That's if you look at him, he's kind of got that just long arms, and this is someone that I think they believe in. In terms of being a tall corner, could kind of be someone they can develop into a full-time starter there. The injury, if you talk to him about his timeline, it's always kind of been, hey, week 5, week 6, start the season out on PUP. And that's something I think some people were hopeful that he might be ready to go for training camp. That didn't happen. If you saw him in rehab drills versus what you saw from Trayvon Diggs, you kind of noticed there was a clear difference there. Frankly, Trayvon looked way closer, even though originally it might have been kind of assumed from the outside that he'd be behind him. So they're still waiting for Revel to get some things cleaned up. I don't think they're going to rush it at all. So I think he's going to start the season on PUP.
Okay. All right. So let's get back to running back now. That'll be the last of the positions that we consider here. That's always a fascination around here with the Cowboys. History of running backs used to be they always had a great one. Not so much these days. So give us an idea of where that situation is now.
Yeah, it's one of those things that almost feels a little bit familiar to last year, a little bit in terms of the starting running back to begin the season. You didn't see it all in preseason. Last year was Zeke Elliott, obviously didn't have any reps, was kind of barely used even in training camp. And this year it's Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams is kind of their clear-cut starter right now. I do think that they're going to have multiple guys have carries in this backfield, but I wouldn't say it's going to be a running back by committee approach like they kind of theorized last year. I think Javonte Williams is going to be the starter. We just didn't see him at all in preseason. And in training camp, he had a couple flashes. I thought his best day might have been in the joint practice against the Rams, which I think is a good thing for him. But, I wasn't necessarily blown away by his training camp performance outside of that. And then, that's kind of adds to the mystery without preseason games of what they might actually have in him. I'm really curious to see what he can do in this offense. Jaden Blue's the X factor in terms of being the speed guy. He had another ankle injury, same ankle, a low ankle sprain this time in the preseason finale. There's not a lot of fear that he won't be ready to go week 1. And then the other question was Miles Sanders or Phil Maffa. Hunter Lepke's making this team too, a fullback who's going to get some carries. But Miles Sanders and Phil Maffa, Miles was a guy that didn't really impress in his one preseason outing. He had a knee bruise that kind of kept him out some parts of training camp, missed the first game, plays the second one, has 7 carries for 15 yards, kind of struggled with some vision stuff, just didn't look really smooth, and then missed the preseason finale with a shoulder injury, actually, to add another injury to it. But he was back out at practice yesterday, and I think this is someone that's going to make this team. And I think Phil Maffa, he wasn't practicing yesterday, which was kind of a shock to us. We kind of said, hey, no one really knew Phil Maffa was dealing with any injuries. It comes out that he's probably going to go on IR, which makes it seem like that he is going to be a redshirt stash for them. Someone they might not have to put through waivers if they do season-ending IR right off the bat. I think they like Phil Maffa a lot and didn't want to lose him potentially. I thought he showed more than his 7th-round pick value in preseason in terms of his ability. So I think that's the decision they ultimately made, is they go with a guy like Miles Sanders, a veteran they think they can trust, rather than, kind of chancing on a rookie 7th-round pick to be their third running back.
So do you think, Joe, as we go into the season here, as we get ready for the season, that this running game is, if we're dividing the NFL into 4 tiers worth of running games, are they the bottom 8?
Undoubtedly. Yeah. I think that that's definitely where they're at. And, maybe that's not fair, but also it's like, how can you really put stock in a mystery that didn't really give you optimism before you even saw it? I think that that's one thing with Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, for example. I mean, these were guys that had negative rushing yards over expected. So I guess rushing yards under expected in terms of advanced analytics, meaning when there were holes there and there was running yards to get, they weren't getting them. In fact, they were getting less than what they could have gotten. That doesn't really, give a lot of optimism. And I know Brian Schottenheimer's had success running the ball. He says it's going to be kind of a pillar of their offense. But with those kind of horses right now, I think there's a lot of mystery and frankly pessimism about what they can do. One of their big takeaways last year was, hey, our running issues weren't with running backs, it was with the offensive line. So if we block better, things will be better. That's why they drafted a guy like Tyler Booker in the first round, who I think, there's not a lot of questions about what he'll be able to do, especially in the running game. But I'm not sold on their horses, to be honest with you. And we'll see, especially with kind of what they have at wide receiver. I think they're going to be more of a pass-heavy attack, frankly. That kind of opens up the run. We'll see what they have, outside of this vanilla offense that they've had in preseason. We'll see what kind of flavor they add in week 1 against Philly.
And you should not be sold on these running backs or this running game. Look, I agree that it all starts up front. You got to have the blocking, and they didn't do a good job with that last year. But that also means that because of that, you probably need to have guys who can break a tackle of their own occasionally. That's why I was a little more sold on Phil Maffa than Jaden Blue, because that's what he does at his size. I have to bring this up. I was looking at ESPN's top 100 players, and the Eagles came in with 11 of those, and then afterward, when they polled NFL executives, they said, yeah, and you should put Devontae Smith in there too. And so it should have been 12 according to the NFL executives. Cowboys had 4. And of course, Micah Parsons was number 1 at 9. He came in 9th, which was higher than any of the Eagles, and I'm not surprised by that at all. But one of the other things that stood out to me in that was that Derrick Henry was also among the top 100, and of course, Cowboys fans are still upset about that they didn't even try to sign Derrick Henry. I don't know that they had the money to do that. Maybe they did. Maybe they could have made that work. But I just got to point out that when the Cowboys drafted Zeke Elliott, I said before that draft, I said, what if they drafted Jalen Ramsey with the 4th pick, and then in the 2nd round come back and get Derrick Henry? Now, what if the Cowboys had listened to me then, Joe?
It's funny because you look at Jalen Ramsey's career. He obviously goes to Jacksonville, right, and does really well. But Jacksonville kind of does this thing where they can't afford their star players after a while, so they ship them off. Now Jalen Ramsey's been on multiple teams. The one thing the Cowboys have actually been good at, obviously the Micah Parsons situation adds a little bit of a curveball to this currently, this stance. But they've kept their guys. They've signed their stars. It hasn't been without drama, but they've signed their stars. Ironically, Jalen Ramsey also represented by David Mulugheta, by the way. But I wonder if they do that kind of path. Maybe Jalen Ramsey is still on the team. Maybe Derrick Henry's both still on this team instead of the Zeke Elliott pick. I'll say this about Derrick Henry too. I think that's going to be one that's hard for the Cowboys and especially Cowboy fans to shake, frankly, because of how well he did last year. I think he'll probably do well again this year. Derrick Henry's a guy who was living in Dallas and wanted to come play for the Cowboys. He was a guy that would have taken less. I've talked to people around the league to come to the Cowboys. And the Cowboys weren't very interested. They didn't, show a lot of interest there at all. So I do think that's kind of something, when you're going to kind of compare the Cowboys running game to elsewhere, you look at situations like Baltimore where Derrick Henry's going to do well. You look at situations across the league where it's like, hey, maybe if they would have done this, like what if they would have traded a 6th-round pick for Brian Robinson, right, who just went to San Francisco? That kind of was a cheap, move they could have done for a year. I do believe that they really like Javonte Williams. But if Brian Robinson goes off, Derrick Henry goes off, and Javonte Williams is relegated to backup running back while they're kind of hoping Jaden Blue adds a spark in week 3, week 4, week 5, then I think we're going to be kind of in the same position we were last year, thinking, hey, what could have been if they would have signed Derrick Henry versus Ezekiel Elliott in free agency.
Joe, that was a great answer. But I think you missed the whole point of the question, which was basically for you to say, yes, Kevin, what you said 9 years ago.
What a genius.
I think I inherently said that. I said that those two might have been still on the roster. We might have had Trayvon Diggs, Jalen Ramsey out there, ball hawking, Derrick Henry in the backfield. No worries about Zeke Elliott.
We won't bring up when I said that I was okay with them drafting Mozzie Smith. We won't bring that up.
Everyone has misses. Everyone has misses.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I just, and I just always love a big back. If a guy, especially if my offensive line is not great, well, then give me a big back. I want a guy that's going to try to break some tackles here. If you're drafting anybody who can't do that, well, or if you say, well, our problem last year was our block and not our, the running back so much. Well, then it was the block, and then go get me a big back. That's the thing that bugs me with this team. But anyway, that's what they think. Let's get over here and talk about Jerry Jones' comments on Michael Irvin's podcast when he talked about the kind of contract he said that Micah Parsons had negotiated back in the spring, which was, of course, not a negotiation. It was just talking, right? If you don't have your representation there, it's not negotiating. It's just talking. And Jerry says he offered him all kinds of money and guaranteed money and all kinds of things. And then, Mulugheta said no. According to Jerry, he said, you can stick it up your ass, which, according to David Mulugheta, is not what was said. And I can imagine that's probably true. If I'm going to believe one or the other, I'm going to go with anybody other than Jerry Jones.
Yeah, but also I think Jerry was paraphrasing there. I mean, obviously Jerry understands the quality and value of having a zinger on that creates headlines, and I think that's what he was going for. But I do think it was a paraphrase based on probably some reality. I do think David Mulugheta told him, "Hey, man, no, I'm still the guy you got to negotiate with. This is whatever you and Micah talked about in terms of years, in terms of guaranteed money, in terms of overall money, and that's one thing Jerry Jones is also insisting." He's insisting that there was a legitimate negotiation. And to your point, Kevin, is it a negotiation if the agent's not there? No, but he's insisting that him and Micah Parsons had a legitimate negotiation. Jerry said, Micah moved me off my mark multiple times, and I was willing to go there for him. And I do think that's kind of why this standstill, this Cold War has really happened, because I think both sides believe they were slighted, truly. I think if you look at Micah Parsons and David Mulugheta, Micah Parsons specifically feels like David Mulugheta, someone that's close to him, someone that's more than an agent to him, was disrespected. Jerry Jones won't say his name. Jerry Jones won't negotiate with him.
That doesn't. He can't pronounce it. I think that's what the deal is.
To be honest, there's a possibility there. He keeps saying Michael Parsons rather than Micah Parsons. So, I think that's kind of a reason to believe that might be true. But I think that, go ahead.
Again, on this, and I just don't know why it needs to be said over and over again, and why the owner can't seem to get this through his head. But regardless of what went on in that room, David Mulugheta is Micah Parsons' paid advocate and paid representative, and he understands the market better than his client. And if his client goes back to him and says, "This is what Jerry talked about," unless Micah Parsons then says, "I want you to sign this deal," nothing took place other than a conversation. I don't understand why this is so difficult for the owner of this team to comprehend, other than the idea is this is where he could make a bunch of headlines for a long period of time. I just don't think that ultimately it does any good for any part of the franchise. And we've said this every week for the past, I don't know how many weeks now.
Yeah, it keeps going. It keeps going. But I mean, Jerry Jones would tell you history would tell him otherwise, that he's done these deals without representation. And I think
his history would also tell him that 30 years he has not been to a championship game. End of story.
Yeah, no doubt.
And he brought it up in that podcast, right? That he did a deal with Michael Irvin, and I do think that's part of the deal with Jerry is that when he gets, I don't know what he does with the other ones, or what the representation does with the other. I'm sure they deal with the agents and all the rest of them. They don't care about them. But if you're a star, then Jerry wants to deal directly with you. And I think there's a part of it with him that Jerry just feels like, this was the thing we all talked about in the early 90s when Jerry was getting in trouble, dealing with people like Deion Sanders and Charles Haley and whoever, was that some of those players were going over the head of the head coach and going directly to Jerry. And so obviously that was an issue back in the day. I think Jerry enjoyed that. I think Jerry enjoyed the fact that they were coming to him. And it's like, I'm dealing one-on-one with you now.
He liked the paternalistic element of being able to meet with his players and offer them what he wanted to offer them, kind of that suited his narrative, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is.
I think the MLBPA and the NFLPA probably had a word for that at one point in time, and I'm not going to say it here.
Yeah, I know where you're going there. Well, look, the way to look at this is, it's like, I watch enough cop shows, right? This is like saying that, all right, you're going to, the cops bring you in, they sit you down, they start asking you questions, you say, I only going to talk to my lawyer here, right?
Yeah.
And they go, oh no, we don't want your lawyer here. Of course they don't want the lawyer there. And of course, Jerry doesn't want the agent there, because the agent's going to protect him. You're going to keep him from doing something that he shouldn't do. And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what the offer was, from that standpoint. As soon as the agent says that doesn't count, then Jerry has to say, okay. And Jerry doesn't want to. Plus, I think Jerry likes it getting out there that, look at the offer I made him. It was a great offer. Then all anybody cares about is that, oh, see, yeah, that's what they should have taken then. It's like, well, we don't know all. Look, I'm no lawyer. I don't know all the ins and outs of everything that possibly goes into all of that. But to think that that's fine, and not to look at it from the standpoint of, look how stubborn Jerry is here. Can you not just say, why is he doing this? It doesn't matter what the offer was. Why is he doing this? Just more nuts.
Kevin, you said you've had some feedback from, or have seen some feedback from fans who have, I don't know if they've turned or what the right word is, but they've gotten to a point where they kind of back Jerry on all this.
Oh yeah. I talk to people. It's like, Jerry did a good, Jerry made him a good offer. Just a stupid agent won't take it. It's like, once again, in our society, this is a case where, instead of letting everybody do their jobs and having a hierarchy here, there's somebody who wants to run everything, and this is it's just not necessary.
Can either one of you, and I'll put you in the most unpleasant of lights, by having to try and make sense of Jerry, can either one of you give me one logical reason for why an owner would negotiate directly with a player?
Leverage. I mean, to be honest, the ability.
Leverage for who, Joe?
For Jerry, the ability to kind of get the best, deal for them. I mean, I think you've probably seen in the past. I do think, just kind of to wrap up just this kind of idea with Jerry and Micah, we've said this over and over again. This feels different. The more time that goes on, the more unique this feels, the more dug in both sides have. Jerry has not been shy about threatening 3 years of control over Micah Parsons and reminding him of that leverage too, that, hey, if you want to do this, play out your $24.1 million contract this year. Sure, we'll franchise tag you for in the 30s next year. And then we'll do one other franchise tag in the 40s next year. And guess what? We've saved $30 million. You're 29. Go hit the free agent market. See ya. That sounds fun. I do think this ultimately ends with Micah and them going to Jerry and signing a long-term extension. When it happens, I'm not sure. But these sides feel dug in, and I do think Jerry has leverage in this case.
In the meantime, both of you guys saw the film, right, of Micah laying on the trainer's table during the game against Atlanta? I mean, how bad a look is that for the Cowboys, for everybody?
It's not a good look, but one thing about Micah is he's very restless, ironically, for laying down and resting on a table. But, this is a guy that can't really sit still, frankly.
Well, he's just bored, right? He's bored with not being able to be on the field,
Yeah, he's bored out of his mind. If we saw him at one practice, he caught passes on a jug machine. He threw passes into a net. This is someone that wants to be out there, and to be honest with you, that's why I do think he'll be out there week 1.
I think he'll be out there on week 1 too. That's what I wanted to get to. So I don't think there's any question that he is. The Cowboys got to have, and here's the problem, Joe. If they were playing Jacksonville in the first game, and it wasn't on Thursday night, kind of when there was no other competition here for people to watch, then I think there's a chance that Jerry would say, yeah, we'll let this go a little further. But you're playing the Eagles on Thursday night, and you simply cannot afford to give up a game to the Eagles. I mean, I'm expecting the Eagles to win anyway. They're a better team. That there's no question about any of that to me. But if I'm Jerry, I'm thinking I got to have all my horses here. I can't possibly go into that game without a pass rush. So
Yeah.
I do think it gets done.
Yeah, and I one thing I think people are wondering, well, how could he play if he hasn't practiced? I think pass rushers, especially those who are in elite shape like he is, I don't think they need to do much, right? I think if you look at Aaron Donald and T.J. Watt, two guys that missed training camp entirely, those guys went on to win 3 combined Defensive Player of the Year awards in years they missed training camps. I think Micah Parsons has that kind of ability as well.
Yeah, let's all agree on that. All right, that's going to do it for the Cowboys segment of our podcast today. And we're going to move over now and talk about the Rangers a little bit, and we'll tell Joe goodbye. Thanks, Joe.
Bye, guys.
Okay, so the Rangers lost 3 of 4 to Kansas City in a very important week, and when we said that they needed to win 5 of 7, and then they rallied and swept the Guardians, and so they won 4 games last week, and then of course concluding Sunday. So that gave a little hope, a little room for hope to get its foot in the door anyway, and then they go out in the very first game against the Angels and lose 4-0. Wasting at least a decent start by Jacob deGrom, who went 5 innings and gave up 2 runs. Not so different, right, Evan?
Yeah, Kevin, we should probably say that this is not this is a live podcast. It's not been pre-recorded from weeks and weeks or months ago, because the story is the same old story time and time again. deGrom didn't feel like he was great on Monday night, but the bottom line is results at this point in time, and he gave up 2 runs. And the Rangers were facing a pitcher in Jose Soriano who's given up a lot of walks, and they didn't create base runners against him. And so the same old story exists, that you just don't know what team you're going to get from one day to the next. Over the weekend against the Guardians, they seem to be more opportunistic, or at least were able to capitalize on some big swings. Against the Angels on the first night, they were not. I do think that the one thing that continues to stick out, the loss to the first loss to the Angels aside, is this team is 40-27 at home, and 26-40 on the road. So it's, mirror images of itself, home and away. And I think that's something that, among other things, the Rangers are going to have to address when the season is over. They're going to have to figure out why there is such a dramatic split between their home success and their road lack of success.
Well, especially when the ballpark now plays as a neutral park, or maybe even more than neutral, or a pitcher friendly park, which
it plays as pitcher friendly now.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. They need to find out what that's all about, because on the one hand, obviously you like that, and if you're 40-27 at home and your pitch is really good, then why would you want to change that, right?
Right, but I think the question there is your approach, and there were things in the approach to the offseason that in retrospect were incomplete, right? They didn't go out and get a bunch of guys who walked. They went and got quote unquote sluggers who were pretty aggressive with their swings. But to that point, if your ballpark is not built to slug, it seems like it is not a great approach to go out and try and get sluggers. All of that said, they're not having problems winning at home. On the road, where those guys should be able to slug a little bit more, they're still not doing it. So I have said this to you. I've said this to any number of people. I've said it to people in the Rangers organization. I get where Bruce Bochy's coming from, because this team has been the most difficult to try and peg in one way or another that I have ever encountered.
Yes, and what you're referencing is that when I went out there on Sunday and sat and talked to him for a few minutes, and he called it the most challenging season of his career. And that doesn't mean it was obviously he coached or he managed some bad teams there in San Diego. Challenging meaning that I started out by asking him about, to me, this is like a puzzle. Every season's a puzzle, right? You got to figure out what it is about this team that we need to do to put it all together. Not only put it together, but to keep it going. What's the situation here? Who do I need to push? Who do I need to back off? How do I need to play this guy and do that guy? He's tried 1,000 things this season, and really not very much has worked. I will say it was, if you look at the last 17 games going into Monday night, Jock Peterson slash lines really good, better than anything you could have hoped for his play this year. And he's had 4 home runs in those 17 games. And so I don't know if he has finally found some rhythm. Of course, he hasn't been healthy all year either. I don't know that you could expect him to keep that up. But, at least that's a positive sign, right?
Oh yeah, I mean he's had a nice robust August, and look, Rowdy Tellez has had a nice August as well, and you need offensive production, and it doesn't matter if it's from Adolis Garcia or if it's from Rowdy Tellez. If you get offensive production from a couple of spots in the middle of that lineup, it makes things a lot more complete. And I think that a big part of why they have had a little bit more robust offensive performance in August is because you have had those two guys kind of bounce back. The downside of all this, right, is the number of injuries. The total number of days the Rangers have missed due to injuries is not that significant major league wide, but a lot of that is that they haven't lost any pitchers to Tommy John or anything like that this year. So they've had a number of 15 on the position player side, a number of 10 to 30-day absences. And because of it, and with the latest news that Marcus Semien won't, in all likelihood, won't play again during the regular season, that Evan Carter probably won't play again during the regular season, they're going to go the full regular season without having what they expected was their quote-unquote regular lineup on the field together for a single game. I don't know how much
not a single game. I was going to ask
you. Not a single game, no. Wow. I don't know how much that contributes to the puzzle. But I think also the bottom line is, John Blake and I have Chris Young on the podcast, on the Rangers podcast this week, and he talked about, we thought we had a good roster of position players from 1 through 13, and his point being that there should have been depth to cover for some of those injuries. And the Rangers just hasn't happened that way.
Well, and I will say this too. I think it says something that Marcus Semien could be out for the rest of the year, and we kind of buried that news. That shows you how little Marcus has really contributed this year, and I'm not so sure you couldn't get. I mean, Ezekiel Duran has started to hit a little bit recently, and of course, Josh Smith has been one of their better offensive players all year long. So replacing him at second base just doesn't feel like it's going to be that hard. At least replacing his production this year.
Well, I mean, Marcus has a good WAR number, but it's all based on the defensive side. The offensive side. And I will say this: if you look around second baseman in the league, let's recall that Marcus Semien, I think, had a 699 OPS last year, and he was a finalist for the Silver Slugger. So second base is not exactly a really strong offense
anyway. It used to be in the infield. It was right behind. Well, I don't know. It wasn't right behind, but it was. That's where you took a guy couldn't play shortstop but could hit. Let's let him play second base. So that is phenomenal that is the case. So Evan, let's talk about Bruce Bochy's situation, since I went out there to write about that. And I have to tell you, it seemed to cause a lot of consternation that I was doing this column on him. And so I wonder, it was a fairly harmless column. Basically, I would just want to sit down with him to see, how do you feel? I mean, was this, as he called it, a challenging season, his most challenging of his career? And I think a lot of people think, why would he want to come back, right? He's in the last year of his contract. Why put up with this anymore? And the chances of it, unless Ray Davis says, okay, here's money for Kyle Schwarber, if you want to get Real Muto as well, sure, here you go. Unless he were to do that, which I don't think that's going to happen, I don't know why Bruce would want to come back next year as well. But he gave me every indication that, that's what he said. I love it. He said, I still love it. I love it every day. One of the things he said was he's done the retirement thing and it's overrated. So I think that's clear now. that so the ball is back in the court of Chris Young and Ray Davis now. Bruce Bochy clearly would like to come back.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that there were some points this year where Boch looked and sounded tired and worn down, and it's certainly been a stressful year. But to your point, Kevin, this is who he is. He does love managing, and he loves the challenge. Now, I will say this. I would not expect, I'm not going to sit here and say that Bruce Bochy would lie or anything like that. But going into the final month of the season, I think that the thing that maybe surprised both you and I was the tone of how eager he sounded to continue to manage. Not so much. I don't think it's that surprising that he would indicate he wants to continue to manage. Because look, if he would have said, "Yeah, I think this is going to be it,"
this is a drag.
Then there's no reason for the Rangers to even play out the season with it. So I some of that is performative for what you have to do for the media, but I do think that he has made peace with the fact that, yes, I'm a major league manager. It's what I do. It's what gives me purpose every day. And I think he wants to continue to do it. And I the only thing I would say is there's going to be a lot to dissect about this team if it doesn't make the postseason, and perhaps if it does make the postseason. And I think on Bochy's part, there would be some question from fans. I don't want to belittle fans anyway, but their opinion on this doesn't really matter. But I don't know if it runs through the front office as well, that maybe there should have been some more proactive lineup changes or things like this and things like that. My perspective on this is Bochy's biggest asset as a manager is the fact that he's a player's manager and a steady hand. And so that is a huge asset. But we also know that two things can be true at the same time. And the other thing is maybe he was a little bit slow to make moves with some of those guys. I don't think making moves in the lineup would have made a significant difference, because this lineup has, by and large, with the exception of Corey Seager and Josh Smith, underperformed 1 through 9. So if I'm looking internally, I'm looking at what was our strategy and how we acquired players. I'm looking at what was the evaluation in particular on guys like Garcia and Heim, who had poor years last year. I guess where I'm saying is I don't see that you can lay this season at the feet of Bruce Bochy. I don't see a particular managerial weakness that has played out this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing that, and of course, before I went out there and I talked to you about that as well, just to see what you thought. And I talked to other people about it as well, just to get an idea about, is there something that I'm not seeing here? Is there something that you think that he should have done that he has not done? And just as you talked about, the fact that they never had the lineup they thought they were going to have, I mean, he did have to tinker with things. And you have to look at, okay, you had to sit people down. I'm going to say, I don't care what fans say. Because I know what fans are. They're frustrated, and they see things, and they see, it's like bringing up these guys like, I don't know, Freeman and Osuna and whoever, Sam Haggerty, all these kind of guys. They might be able to give you a few days when they'll be pretty good, and that's valuable, right? If a guy comes up and he plays a week or 2 weeks and he's hot when he plays, look what Travis Jankowski did for that World Series team. He's as valuable as almost anybody in that second tier of players for the Rangers, that season. But that's not who Travis Jankowski was his whole career. That's just, he had a career year too. And so I do see the value in those kind of things, but you cannot count on that. And if you're constantly as a manager, moving guys around all the time, I think it doesn't wear well with the veterans on your team, and certainly with the stars on your team. I mean, you look at what the Dodgers used to do, or still like to do. They're constantly moving guys around all over the place. It seems clownish to me. Like Mookie Betts is playing shortstop. He's playing right field. I mean, what's going on here?
I mean, there's things to be said both ways, but you know that this is who Bruce Bochy is, and he's been consistent with who he is. I think that the biggest, if I had a issue with anything, this season, it's that I didn't feel like there were enough moments where the Rangers tried to do the small things to optimize run scoring opportunities. And that's a fair criticism, but at the same point in time, I go back to what the slogan was going into the season, which was "We're built to slug." And so now you're going to ask a bunch of guys who are built to slug to go play small ball. So I think Boch looks at it from this perspective. These are who my guys are. I'm going to trust that the process will eventually get to the true numbers. And it just hasn't worked out this year.
No, it hasn't worked. And my issue, Evan, and boy, this is going to make me sound like the old man, get off my lawn. But I just don't understand guys don't playing fundamentally good baseball. And of course, Adolis has never been a fundamentally good baseball player. He has tremendous ability, and he's gone a long way with it. And but people throw him to the wrong base. People. When Wyatt Langford said that one day where he got thrown out at third, and he said, well, that was just baseball, and I just didn't know where I was, or something like that. It's like, no, that's not just baseball. That's a huge screw up on your part. Your job as a base runner is to see where the ball goes and then to pick up the third base coach. It is as simple as that. Just pick up the third base coach and do whatever he tells you to do.
And I agree with all of that. And I would say this too. We've seen numerous examples this year where Wyatt's all-out effort has parlayed itself into runs or created run scoring opportunities. And I don't want to take any aggressiveness away from him if I'm the manager. But what I think I'm getting at with all of this is there's going to be some outs on the bases if you're an aggressive base runner, because this offense, once again, has continued to fail in key situations. Every error that happens on the base paths becomes magnified. Every misplaced pitch by a reliever becomes magnified because there are numerous stress points in games. I think that was the thing about Saturday night's game against Cleveland. The Rangers won 10-0. Was when was the last time the Rangers just came out, jumped on a team, continued to add on, didn't have to go to high leverage relievers to win a game? When was the last time they had a breathe easy type of game? No. And they just haven't had any of those.
No, they haven't. Well, look, and I'm all for aggressive baseball. I want them to play more small ball. That's the kind of team they need to be in this ballpark. If this ballpark tells you it's pitcher friendly, well, then that just tells you everything, right? Then this is what we need to be. We need to be a team that's going to hit the ball in the gaps. One of the things one of the big failures this year was Josh Young, right? And so if we remember when Josh Young came up, what is it they said we want him to do? We want him to pull the ball. He's an opposite field hitter really right now. We want him to pull the ball. Well, now in some ways that seems to me to have been a mistake because ideally now the problem for me with Josh is that every swing in any count is exactly the same. He is swinging from the heels on every freaking pitch. Yeah. Instead of, I don't understand. Why don't you go back to what made you so good in college? Why don't you go back to going to the right field occasionally? And that's the other thing I'm seeing. I don't want to seem like I'm picking on Wyatt Langford here, but this is a guy with a lot of ability, right? And there were comparisons to Mike Trout early on, and everybody knew that was unfair. He's not going to be Mike Trout's a Hall of Famer, so that's going to be an issue because the deal was Mike Trout was great from the get-go. Boom, he was putting up unbelievable slash lines in his first and second season. Wyatt's not doing that, and Wyatt has had a good year, but the problem is that Evan Carter is apparently not going to be the player they thought he was going to be, and if Josh Young may not be the player they thought he was going to be, so they've got to get one of those guys. If you're going to be good, you can't constantly, because Ray Davis apparently is not going to pay for it, you can't constantly be signing people like Corey Seager and Marcus Simeon.
Right.
One of these guys you produce is going to have to be a star. That was the big problem for the Rangers, right? For 20 years, no stars produced in the position
Right.
among the position players, and you had to do that. Well, to me, Wyatt Langford looked the most logical of those people, and he may still do that. But this year, a guy who had such a great command of the strike zone as a rookie, I watch him this year, and he's taking pitches that aren't on the corner; they're over the plate, and he's taking them for a called third strike.
Sure.
And it's like, why aren't you at least trying to go to right field with that? Why aren't you at least trying to get your bat on the ball? Just do something. But Lord, don't be just taking a called third strike or on a pitch that's not even on a corner. This is over the plate.
Yeah, they've taken too many pitches in the strike zone for strike three this year, and I think that comes back to the Rangers looking for specific pitches and trying to catch up with the whole idea of teams that are pitching backwards, which has become much more prevalent. And instead of being ready to hit the fastball and able to adjust to something else, it's like the Rangers are geared up to hit an off-speed pitch or a breaking ball, and then when they get a fastball, they're frozen and they're too late on it.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what it looks like. It certainly does. To be surprised by a fastball, to me, it's just like, well, that's inexcusable. I mean, you might not catch up to a fastball, but you can't be surprised by it. It's the number one pitch in baseball. So
Yep.
I just it is a little disconcerting to watch, and plus if you add on top of all of that. After the game Sunday, Sean McFarland was covering the game for us. I didn't go in the locker room because I was just writing about Bochy. I went to the press conference and, of course, talked to him before the game. And he said, the only person in here basically was Wyatt, and he's sitting at his locker. This is the game that they won. They swept the Guardians, and he said, and Wyatt was playing a video game, and we had to kind of wait for him to finish that. It's like, where is the I don't want to say.
I think there was, in retrospect, I think on Sunday there was at least an explanation for that. I think there have been a couple of occasions this year where they've had like father-kid Sundays, and I think that on Sunday they had some kind of thing with fathers and sons. Recently they had a fathers daughters thing where all the parents with young kids had them in the lunchroom to eat or something. So, but to your point, it does feel like this is a team that doesn't connect on some of these subjects as much as you'd like to think that they do.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't connect in a lot of ways. They don't connect at the plate. They don't connect with each other. They don't connect with us. They don't connect anywhere. I'm not sure if they're connecting with the manager either.
That's just a lot of angry yelling at clouds there. They don't connect with anybody.
Well, I brought up in my newsletter this week. I can remember going into the clubhouse, and of course you remember this, going in the clubhouse with Will Clark and Rusty Greer and those guys, and I realized, look, that's over 25 years ago, and clubhouses have changed, and baseball has changed, and all of that is different. But I remember Rusty Greer telling me once how much all that meant to him. And his growth as a big leaguer and being around Will Clark. He loved Will Clark.
And I've had that conversation recently with Ian Kinsler about what it was like to be around Michael Young and Adrian Beltre. And yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for it, but not every player has that. Not every player needs to have that. And, I think it's lacking in the game today because it has become so individualistic and geared towards making sure you get your best swing off. But the teams that do win, they find a way to connect.
Yeah, they do. And you got to have some of that personality. And I think that's one of the things that we've talked about. And we'll talk about it more as we get closer to the end of the season and, of course, into the off season about what this clubhouse needs.
But Kevin, we probably need to wrap up because after all that yelling, you probably need to go take your blood pressure medicine.
I've already taken it, so I'm on
okay.
Yeah. Although I do hear sirens in the distance. So that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We thank you for listening in. We hope you'll come back next week. We'll have a better idea of what the Cowboys look like as they get ready for their game against the Eagles next Thursday night. That's kind of a weird way to start the season on Thursday night. Yes, maybe. That's what's going to happen. And I have to say this, I don't think that's going to be pretty. But anyway, from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.